Once upon a time, in a dusty village where the streets were nothing but narrow paths of dry dirt and stone, there lived a girl named Amina. She was small and thin, with wide brown eyes that sparkled with dreams far too big for the place she was born into. Her family's tiny house, built from sun-baked mud bricks, stood at the very edge of the village where the earth seemed even thirstier and the nights colder. Amina's father, Haroun, was a man broken by life. His back was hunched from years of hard labor that never seemed to lift them out of poverty. He worked the fields for rich landlords who tossed him a few coins at the end of each long day. Sometimes when work was scarce, Haroun would beg at the mosque door, his dignity slowly bleeding away with each coin he accepted. Amina's mother, Fariha, was a quiet woman who carried her sadness like a second skin. She spent her days weaving broken mats or mending the few clothes they owned, humming old songs that once made Amina dance when she was little. But now, those songs just sounded like memories of happier times that would never return. Amina had two younger brothers, both too small to understand the heavy burden that had settled on the family. They laughed and played in the dust, chasing after torn pieces of cloth tied to sticks like kites, their feet kicking up small clouds with every step. Life was hard, but Amina still dreamed. She dreamed of one day escaping the endless cycle of hunger and sorrow. Maybe she could work in the city, become a seamstress, or even teach children to read. She had hope tucked deep in her heart, hidden away where poverty couldn't steal it. But life has a cruel way of crushing even the smallest hopes. One hot afternoon, Haroun returned home, his clothes torn and his face bruised. His hands trembled as he held a small cloth bag filled with coins. His eyes, usually dull and tired, shone with something Amina couldn't recognize at first. It wasn't happiness. It was shame. That night, as they sat around the small fire, Haroun finally spoke. "Amina," he said, not meeting her eyes, "we have been given a chance to live better. Mr. Karim has offered to clear our debts, if you agree to marry him." The words fell into the silence like stones into a deep well. The fire crackled, the only sound in the heavy darkness. Amina's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mr. Karim was known to everyone in the village, a cruel old man with a crooked back and a crueler heart. He had wives before, younger than Amina, and none of them stayed long. Some said he beat them, some said worse, but no one dared to speak too loudly. Fariha sobbed quietly, hiding her face in her scarf. Haroun looked at Amina with broken eyes, the eyes of a man who knew he was damning his own daughter, but saw no other way to save his family. "You will save us, Amina," her father said, his voice shaking. "You will save your brothers from starving." Amina sat frozen. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear into the night. But she saw her brothers' small faces, innocent and unaware, sleeping in the corner. She saw her mother's thin hands shaking. She saw the emptiness in her father's soul. And she realized she had no choice. The next 3 days passed like a nightmare. Women from the village came to prepare her, their faces somber, their hands rough. They scrubbed her skin until it burned, braided her hair until her scalp ached, and wrapped her in a heavy red dress that seemed to weigh down her very soul. She barely spoke. She barely moved. It felt like she had already died. And this was just the shell they were decorating for burial. On the night before the wedding, Amina slipped out of the house. She walked barefoot to the fields beyond the village, where the sky stretched endlessly above her, dotted with 1,000 stars. She sat on the dry ground, hugging her knees to her chest, and whispered to the stars. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking, "if anyone is listening, help me. Save me." The wind answered with a low, sad sigh. The morning of the wedding, the village buzzed with whispers. Some pitied Amina, some envied the money her family would receive, but no one dared to stop what was about to happen. Power and money had always spoken louder than kindness here. At the mosque, Amina sat quietly while they adorned her with thick gold bangles and rings that pinched her small fingers. The smell of incense made her dizzy. Her heart hammered in her chest as the priest began to speak, asking the ancient questions, calling for her to agree. She opened her mouth, and then the heavy wooden doors slammed open with a thunderous crash. Every head turned. There, standing in the doorway, was Yusuf. Dust clung to his clothes. His hair was longer than she remembered, and his face was harder, more lined, but his eyes were just the same, burning with life, burning with fury. For a moment no one moved. Even the priest froze, his mouth open mid-sentence. Mr. Karim's face twisted into a snarl. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked. Yusuf stepped forward, his boots heavy against the stone floor. He pointed straight at Amina. "I have come for her," he said, his voice steady and fierce, "and I will not leave without her." The villagers gasped. Amina's heart leapt so wildly she thought it might break her ribs, and in that single moment, everything began to change. The room fell into a thick, choking silence. Only the sound of Amina's quickened breathing filled her own ears. Yusuf stood tall, shoulders squared, a fierce determination written across every line of his face. Dust clung to him like a second skin, and yet he looked more powerful than anyone else in the room. Mr. Karim's lips twisted into a cruel smile. He took a step forward, his heavy robes dragging against the floor. "You?" he spat. "A boy who ran away from this village with nothing but empty pockets. You dare to speak against me?" Yusuf didn't flinch. He took another step closer, his gaze never leaving Amina. "I dare," he said, voice low and dangerous, "because she is not some object to be bought with blood money." The villagers murmured nervously. Some looked between Yusuf and Mr. Karim. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen what happened to those who crossed Mr. Karim before. It never ended well. Harun, Amina's father, staggered to his feet. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Yusuf," he pleaded, "you don't understand. We had no choice. There was no other way." Yusuf's eyes softened for a moment as he looked at Harun. "There's always another way," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You just forgot how to hope." Mr. Karim laughed, a sound so dry and cruel it made Amina flinch. "You come here with empty hands, with nothing but words, and you think you can challenge me." His voice rose, filling the mosque. "This girl belongs to me now." Amina felt her stomach twist in fear. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there like a statue. But something else, something deeper, rooted her to the spot. Hope, a tiny, stubborn seed that had somehow survived inside her. Yusuf stepped closer to Amina, close enough that she could see the sweat on his brow, the intensity in his eyes. He reached into the pouch slung over his shoulder and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I did not come empty-handed," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder. He unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a sparkling chain of silver coins, intricate and heavy. Gasps echoed through the crowd. No one in the village had ever seen so much silver at once. "I worked for this," Yusuf said, holding the chain up high for all to see. "I bled for this, in the city, in the fields, on the docks, and I have enough now to pay every debt Harun owes, and more." Mr. Karim's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. "I offer this," Yusuf said, his voice unwavering, "to free Amina. Not to buy her like cattle, but to free her from this shame." Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. Her knees felt weak, but she stood taller somehow, the weight on her chest lifting. Slightly. The village elder, an old man named Malik, cleared his throat and stepped forward. His voice was cautious. "Mr. Karim, the debts would be paid. The girl would not be bound to you against her will." Karim turned to Malik, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "I made a deal," he growled. "A man's word is law." "And a man who forces a child into marriage," Yusuf said sharply, "is no man at all." There was a long, tense silence. Mr. Karim's eyes darted around the room looking for support, but the villagers, emboldened by Yusuf's bravery, looked away. No one came to his defense. "You'll regret this," Karim hissed under his breath. His voice was low, venomous. "You think this is over? It's only just begun." With a snarl, he turned and stormed out of the mosque, his footsteps heavy with fury. For a moment everything was still. Then Harun collapsed into a sitting position, burying his face in his hands. Fariha sobbed openly. The priest mumbled prayers under his breath, as if trying to cleanse the space from the evil that had just passed through it. Amina looked at Yusuf, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear anything else. You came back, she whispered, her voice trembling. I promised I would, Yusuf said, smiling softly for the first time. The villagers began to drift out, whispering among themselves. Some congratulated Harun. Others warned him in low voices that Karim would not forget this insult. But for now, for this brief moment, Amina was free, or so she thought. As Yusuf led her away from the mosque, his hand lightly brushing against hers, a cold chill ran down Amina's spine. In the shadows beyond the square, she thought she saw a flash of movement, a figure watching them from the darkness. Mr. Karim was not the type to let humiliation pass without revenge, and deep in her bones Amina knew. The worst was still to come. That night the village was unusually silent. The usual sounds, distant laughter, the clanging of pots, the hum of night insects, all seemed to vanish, swallowed by a heavy blanket of fear that settled over every home. Inside Harun's house, a small oil lamp flickered weakly, throwing long, shaky shadows across the walls. Amina sat close to Yusuf, her hands clutching the folds of her dress tightly. Her parents were huddled in the corner, whispering in low, frantic voices. Yusuf kept glancing toward the door, his muscles tense like a lion ready to fight. He had insisted they stay together tonight, fearing what might come under the cover of darkness. And Amina, who once might have laughed at such caution, now found herself afraid to even blink too long. He won't give up, Yusuf said in a low voice, his gaze locked on the dark window. Men like him, they don't know how to lose. Amina shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. What can we do? She whispered. If he comes back, we can't fight him. Yusuf turned to her, his face softening. We'll find a way. I won't let him touch you. I swear it, Amina. A knock rattled the door, a harsh, angry pounding that made everyone jump. Harun froze. Fariha let out a small cry and covered her mouth. Open up, a voice barked from outside. In the name of the village council. Harun stumbled to his feet, fear written all over him. Yusuf grabbed his arm, stopping him. Let me, Yusuf said, his voice steady. He walked to the door and opened it a crack. Outside stood 3 men, villagers Amina recognized. They weren't armed, but they had the hard, uncomfortable look of men caught between fear and duty. The council demands Yusuf present himself at the square, the leader said stiffly. Immediately. Yusuf's jaw tightened. Under whose order? Mr. Karim, the man muttered, unable to meet his eyes. He claims you assaulted his honor. Yusuf let out a humorless laugh. His honor? The man winced. Please, Yusuf. If you don't come, he'll say you're a coward. He'll call for worse. Yusuf closed the door slowly and turned to Amina. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment she understood. He had no choice. If he didn't go, Karim would paint him as a criminal, make him an outlaw in the village he once called home. I'll go, Yusuf said quietly. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. No, Amina said, grabbing his hand without thinking. Please don't leave me. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a heartbeat Yusuf hesitated, but he gently pulled his hand free and touched her cheek lightly, a soft, aching touch full of promises he couldn't speak aloud. I'll come back for you, he said. I always come back. Then he slipped out into the night. Amina stood frozen, listening as his footsteps faded into the darkness. The room seemed colder without him, the shadows longer and deeper. Harun sagged against the wall, rubbing his face with trembling hands. It's out of our hands now, he muttered. God help us all. Outside, the village square was lit by torches. A small crowd had gathered, their faces pale and wary. Mr. Karim stood at the center, wrapped in a fine cloak of dark velvet. His swollen pride radiated from him like a foul stench. When Yusuf entered the square, a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. You dare to show your face? Karim sneered. You should have run while you had the chance, boy. I have nothing to run from, Yusuf said calmly. You think this silver? Karim spat the word like poison, gives you the right to humiliate me, to steal what's mine. She is not a thing to be stolen, Yusuf said, his voice rising. She is a human being. She is Amina. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some nodded in silent agreement, but no one spoke aloud. Karim turned to the village elder, Malik, who stood stiffly at the side. Judge him, Karim barked. Punish him. If the council won't act, I will. Malik looked around, his face torn with conflict. He cleared his throat. According to our laws, Yusuf has not broken any sacred rule. The girl's debts were paid. She was never truly married to you. Karim's face turned an ugly shade of red. Laws? You speak of laws to me. He reached under his cloak and pulled out something shiny. A knife. Amina, peeking from the shadows beyond the square, gasped in horror. The villagers drew back, but none stepped forward to stop Karim as he advanced on Yusuf. You took what was mine, Karim hissed. Now I'll take your life. The first slash came fast. Yusuf barely dodged it, the blade grazing his arm and drawing a thin line of blood. Karim lunged again, wild with rage. Yusuf grabbed a fallen stick from the ground, using it to block Karim's furious strikes. But he was unarmed, outmatched, and Karim fought like a madman with nothing left to lose. Amina could stand it no longer. Without thinking, she ran into the square, her heart pounding, her mind screaming. "Stop!" she cried. But it was too late. The knife flashed in the torchlight, and Yusuf stumbled backward, clutching his side. Blood bloomed through his shirt, dark and terrible. "No!" Amina screamed, rushing to his side. The villagers finally stirred, pulling Karim away. Someone knocked the knife from his hand. Malik shouted for calm. Women wept openly. Yusuf collapsed to his knees, his face twisted in pain. Amina knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You said you'd always come back. You promised." Yusuf's hand found hers, weak but warm. "I always keep my promises," he whispered. And then his eyes fluttered closed. The night swallowed them all, cold and merciless. The village square was chaos. People ran in different directions, some shouting for help, others standing frozen. In horror, not knowing what to do, Amina stayed where she was, cradling Yusuf's head in her lap, her hands trembling and stained with his blood. The torches around them flickered violently in the wind, casting the scene in a wild, almost nightmarish light. "Someone, please," she screamed. "He's dying." Harun and Fariha pushed through the crowd, their faces white with fear. Harun dropped to his knees beside them, inspecting the wound with shaking hands. "It's deep," he muttered. "Too deep." Fariha pressed her scarf to Yusuf's side, trying to stem the flow, but the blood soaked through in seconds. Malik, the village elder, called for the healer. "Run to Fatima's house," he barked at a boy nearby. "Tell her to bring everything." The boy sprinted away like his feet were on fire. Amina bent over Yusuf, whispering to him, desperate to keep him conscious. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me. You can't leave. Not now. Not after everything." Yusuf's eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. He tried to speak, but only coughed weakly, a small trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. "Don't talk," Amina said, her voice breaking. "Just hold on. Help is coming." Across the square, Mr. Karim struggled against the villagers, who held him back. His face was twisted with rage and hatred. "This is not over," he bellowed. "You think this boy saves you? I will burn you all if I must." The words made Amina's blood run cold. Karim wasn't just angry. He was dangerous, wild, and desperate. A man like that would destroy everything if he thought he had nothing left to lose. Moments later, Fatima the healer arrived, carrying a small bag and a bundle of herbs. She was an older woman with quick, sharp hands and a mind that stayed calm even when everyone else fell apart. Without a word, she knelt beside Yusuf and began working, cutting away the bloodied fabric, cleaning the wound, muttering prayers under her breath. Amina watched, her heart in her throat, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Fatima looked up, her face grim. "He needs to rest," she said. "If the fever doesn't take him, he might survive." "Take him to our house," Harun said quickly. "We'll watch over him." Several villagers helped lift Yusuf carefully. Amina never let go of his hand, following them closely as they carried him through the dark streets, back to the small mud brick house at the edge of the village. Inside, they laid him on the thin mattress that served as the family's only bed. Fatima gave Amina instructions: how to change the bandages, how to make the fever tea, how to recognize the signs of death if it came. And then they left, leaving Amina, Harun, Fariha, and her two small brothers huddled in the tiny space, the air heavy with fear and blood. The hours blurred together. Amina sat at Yusuf's side, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth, forcing small sips of water past his cracked lips. Sometimes he stirred, muttering words she couldn't understand. Sometimes he lay terrifyingly still, so quiet she had to press her hand to his chest to feel the faint rise and fall. Outside, the night stretched on endlessly. The villagers had gone back to their homes, but no one slept easy. Word spread quickly. Karim had gone mad. He was gathering men loyal to him, promising them silver and land if they helped him crush the ones who had humiliated him. Harun sat by the door, a wooden club across his lap, his eyes bloodshot but alert. Fariha prayed quietly in the corner, whispering to God for mercy they all knew they didn't deserve. Amina didn't pray. She made a silent promise instead. "If you live, Yusuf, I swear, I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Near dawn, Yusuf moaned softly and opened his eyes, his gaze finding Amina through the haze of pain. "You stayed," he croaked. "Of course," she whispered back, squeezing his hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good, because there's something you need to know." "Shh," Amina said, brushing his hair back. "Rest. You can tell me later." But Yusuf shook his head slightly, grimacing with the effort. "Karim," he gasped. "He's not just angry. He's planning to take the village." Amina's heart stopped for a second. "What do you mean?" Yusuf struggled to stay awake. "He has allies. From the city. Smugglers. Thieves. Worse. They're coming." Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about war. "If they come," Amina said, her voice trembling, "we won't stand a chance." Yusuf gripped her hand tighter, surprising her with the strength still left in him. "You have to leave," he said. "Take your family. Get far away." "And leave you behind?" she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "You have to survive," Yusuf said fiercely. "Promise me, Amina, promise." She pressed her forehead to his, her tears wetting his skin. "I promise," she whispered, though her heart shattered at the words. But deep down, even as she spoke, she knew she wasn't going anywhere without fighting for him first. Outside the small house hidden by the trees, Mr. Karim watched and smiled darkly. The real storm was only just beginning. Morning came, but it brought no warmth, no lightness, only a cold, sick fear that clung to everything. Amina sat by Yusuf's side, watching his chest rise and fall, each shallow breath a silent battle. Her hand never left his, as if by holding on, she could anchor him to life. Outside, the village buzzed with tension. Men gathered in small groups, speaking in low, anxious voices. Women pulled their children closer, eyes darting nervously toward the dusty road that led to the edge of the world, and to danger. By midday, Malik, the village elder, came to the door. His face was drawn and tired, his hands wringing his scarf tightly. "Amina," he said softly, not even glancing inside where Yusuf lay, "we must talk." Harun stood, his old bones creaking. Fariha clutched her scarf tighter around her face, hiding her tears. Amina stepped outside, the sun glaring harshly on the dry earth. A small circle of villagers stood nearby, watching her with a mixture of pity and fear. "Karim has sent a message," Malik said, his voice grim. "He demands you be given to him by sunset, or he and his men will burn the village." Amina felt the ground tilt under her feet. She gripped the doorway for support. "He won't stop," Malik continued. "He has armed men with him now, from outside. Criminals. They'll tear this place apart." The words echoed in her ears, cold and final. "And if I go?" Amina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Malik hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Maybe he'll leave us alone. Maybe not. But at least we'd have a chance." She saw it then, the fear in their faces, the quiet, selfish hope. They were asking her to sacrifice herself to save them. Harun stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "No," he said fiercely. "She's just a girl. She's suffered enough. We will fight." But Malik shook his head. "Fight? With what? Old sticks and bare hands. We're farmers, Harun, not soldiers." Amina looked past them to the hills beyond the village. She imagined the men coming, rough, brutal men who would not hesitate to burn, to kill, to destroy. Everything they couldn't control. Her brothers, her mother, Yusuf. All of them would suffer if Karim's rage wasn't stopped. She felt the weight of their lives pressing down on her shoulders, so heavy she could hardly breathe. "I need to think," she said, her voice hollow. Malik nodded solemnly. "You have until sunset." They left her standing there, small and alone against the vast, empty sky. Inside, she returned to Yusuf's side. His fever had worsened. His skin was burning hot, his breathing shallow and ragged. She wiped his forehead with a cool cloth, blinking back tears. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't want to leave you. I can't." Yusuf stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, his gaze foggy, but still full of that fierce stubbornness she had loved since they were children. "You won't leave," he said hoarsely. "You'll fight." "But how?" she choked. "We have nothing. No weapons, no strength, just fear." "You have me," Yusuf whispered, "and you have their hearts." She frowned, not understanding. Yusuf gripped her wrist weakly. "Make them believe," he said. "Make them see there's more to lose than just their lives. There's honor. There's hope." Amina sat back, her mind racing. Could she? Could a poor girl, barely more than a child herself, convince a village of broken men to rise up against a monster? She thought of Karim's face, twisted with rage. She thought of Yusuf bleeding in her arms. She thought of her brother's small hands clutching at her skirts, and something inside her hardened. She would not be a lamb led to slaughter. She would not be a silent sacrifice to an old man's pride. She would fight, even if it killed her. Rising to her feet, Amina pushed open the door and stepped back into the sunlight. "Gather everyone," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Meet me at the mosque." Within an hour, the villagers stood in a nervous crowd, whispering, glancing over their shoulders, as if expecting Karim's men to descend at any moment. Amina stood on the mosque steps, her heart hammering in her chest. She scanned their faces, tired, scared, desperate, just like hers. "You all know why we're here," she began, her voice ringing out across the square. "You know what Karim demands." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "You think giving me to him will save you," she continued, feeling the anger rise in her chest. "You think he'll stop once he has what he wants." She shook her head fiercely. "He won't. He'll come back for more. He'll bleed this village dry one by one, your daughters, your wives, your sons, until there's nothing left but ashes." A silence fell over the crowd, heavy and suffocating. "I won't go quietly," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't be another victim you mourn in silence. If we die, let it be fighting. Let it be with our heads held high." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Who will stand with me?" she cried. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved, and then Harun stepped forward. "I will," he said. His voice broke something in the crowd. One by one, others stepped forward too, young boys, old men, women, with fire in their eyes. "I will. And me. For my children. For our village." The words grew louder, stronger, until the entire square rang with them. Amina swallowed back the lump in her throat. She had done it. She had given them something. Karim had tried to steal their courage. Now all that remained was the battle itself. As the sun began its slow, bloody descent toward the horizon, the villagers armed themselves with whatever they could find. Farming tools, sticks, even kitchen knives. Their faces were grim, but there was a light in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Amina returned to Yusuf, kneeling beside him. "We're ready," she whispered. "We're going to fight." Yusuf opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "I always knew you would," he whispered. And somewhere far beyond the hills, dust rose into the sky. Karim and his men were coming. The first sign of Karim's arrival was the dust. A thick cloud, rising over the hills, growing larger by the second. The setting sun turned the dust blood red, casting an eerie glow over the village. Amina stood at the front of the square, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the murmurs around her. Beside her, Harun gripped a rusted axe. Other villagers held tools meant for farming but now pressed into shaky service as weapons. Children had been hidden away in the cellars. The women and men who remained looked at each other, faces lined with fear but also something fiercer, determination. "They're coming!" someone shouted from the lookout point. Amina's hands tightened around the wooden staff she carried. She glanced back at the mosque where Yusuf lay, knowing he would want to be out here fighting beside them. But he couldn't. He had given her strength enough to fight for them both. The first riders appeared, rough men, faces wrapped in cloth to guard against the dust, weapons glinting in the dying light. At the head of them, riding a black horse, was Karim. He looked monstrous, a king of thieves and murderers coming to collect what he believed was owed. They thundered into the village square, scattering dust and stones. Some villagers flinched, stepping back instinctively, but Amina held her ground. Karim reined in his horse in front of her, sneering down. "You foolish girl," he snarled. "You could have saved them. Now you'll watch them die first." He raised his hand, a signal, and his men dismounted with chilling precision. Amina swallowed her fear. She raised her staff high, her voice ringing across the square. "We are not afraid of you," she shouted. Karim laughed, a horrible grating sound. "We'll see." The first blow came fast. A thug lunged toward one of the villagers, swinging a heavy club. The old farmer dodged clumsily, but was knocked down. Before Karim's man could finish him, Harun stepped in, swinging his axe in a wide arc, forcing the attacker back. And just like that, the battle exploded. Amina ducked a swinging blade, jabbing her staff into the stomach of the man in front of her. He grunted and stumbled back, surprised by her ferocity. Around her, villagers fought clumsily but fiercely, driven by desperation. The air filled with the sounds of battle, cries of pain, the clash of metal, the dull thud of fists against flesh. Amina moved through the chaos like a spirit, her heart pounding wildly, her body moving on instinct. She saw friends fall, men she had known all her life, women who had rocked her as a baby, collapsing under the brutal blows of Karim's men. But for every villager that fell, another rose, and slowly, painfully, they began to push Karim's men back. Karim himself sat astride his horse, watching with cold fury. His plan had been simple: terrorize the villagers into submission. He had not counted on them fighting like cornered wolves. Amina spotted him, sitting tall, untouched by the chaos. Rage boiled inside her. She gripped her staff and pushed through the fighting, determined to reach him. Amina dodged a man swinging a curved sword, ducked under another thug's wild punch, and slammed her staff into the knees of a third. She moved closer and closer to Karim, every muscle screaming, every breath burning in her lungs. Finally, she stood before him. He sneered down at her. "You think you can stop me, little girl?" Then he taunted. Without warning, she swung her staff at his horse's legs. The animal reared, screaming, throwing Karim violently to the ground. The villagers cheered. Karim scrambled up, pulling a dagger from his belt. His fine cloak was torn, his face twisted, with pure hatred. "You will die for this," he roared. He charged at her, dagger flashing. Amina braced herself, ready to fight, but Karim was faster, heavier, stronger. He slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. The dagger slashed her, arm sending a shock of pain through her body. She rolled, scrambling to her feet, clutching her bleeding arm. Karim came again, slashing wildly. This time she was ready. As he lunged, she sidestepped and jabbed the broken end of her staff hard into his ribs. Karim grunted, stumbling back. The villagers saw her stand tall against him, and it ignited something deep inside them. They surged forward, overwhelming Karim's remaining men. One by one, Kareem's thugs dropped their weapons and fled, disappearing into the desert beyond the village. Kareem looked around, realizing he was alone. Blood dripped from his nose. Dust caked his mouth. "You think you've won?" He spat at Amina, panting heavily. "You've won nothing. I will come back. I will burn this village to the ground." "No," Amina said, her voice steady and strong. "You won't." Before Kareem could react, Haroun swung, his axe in a wide, brutal arc, not at Kareem's head but at the ground in front of him. The message was clear. Kareem paled. Another man, an old fisherman, stepped forward and threw a handful of dust at Kareem's feet, a final insult. "You are banished," Malik declared, his voice thundering across the square. "You are nothing. Here, leave, or die where you stand." Kareem looked around, wild-eyed, realizing no one would help him. He spat once at the ground, then turned and stumbled away, clutching his side. He disappeared into the darkness, alone and broken. The battle was over. The village was bloodied, battered, but standing. And Amina. Amina stood tall at the center of it all, covered in dust and blood, her heart pounding with fierce, unbearable relief. They had won. But the cost was written everywhere, in the faces of the wounded, in the silence of the fallen. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had no time for tears. Yusuf was still fighting for his life, and he needed her now more than ever. The moment Kareem disappeared into the darkness, Amina turned and ran. Her legs barely felt real under her, but she pushed through the pain, weaving between the wounded and the fallen, the cries of the village fading behind her. All she could hear was the pounding of her heart, and one name in her mind, over and over, Yusuf. She burst into the small house, slamming the door behind her. Inside, the air was thick and still, carrying the metallic scent of blood and the bitter smoke of the battlefield outside. Yusuf lay where she had left him, his face pale, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. "Yusuf!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. When he saw her, a weak smile pulled at his lips. "You came back," he whispered. "Of course," she said, choking on the sob that clawed its way up her throat. "I told you, I'm not leaving you." Her hands fumbled with the cloth pressed against his side. Blood had soaked through again. His wound, despite Fatima's herbs and all their prayers, was worse. He was slipping away. "No," she whispered fiercely, pressing harder against the wound. "No, no, stay with me." Yusuf's hand, a strong once, now felt weightless as it brushed her cheek. "You're safe," he murmured. "That's all. That matters." Tears streamed down Amina's face. She shook her head, refusing to accept what was happening. She had fought for him, for their village. She had faced Kareem without flinching. But this, losing Yusuf, this she could not bear. "You're going to live," she insisted, even though her voice trembled. "You have to live. We have a life to build. You promised me, remember?" Yusuf's fingers curled weakly around hers. "I kept my promise," he said, his voice a thin thread of sound. "I came back for you." "And I'll stay with you," she said fiercely. "You're not going anywhere. We have time. We have—" Her voice broke. "We have everything still to do." Yusuf's gaze softened. He looked at her as if memorizing every line of her face, every freckle, every tear. "I love you," he whispered. The words hit Amina harder than any sword ever could. It was the first time he had said them aloud, and she knew, deep in her soul, that it would also be the last. "I love you too," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against his. For a few precious seconds, they just breathed together, clinging to a love that had been born from dust and fire and pain. A love that, for all its briefness, burned brighter than anything the world could offer. Yusuf's hand slipped from hers, his eyes closed. His chest, which had fought so hard for every breath, finally stilled. Amina sat frozen, the silence swallowing her whole. The world seemed to tilt around her, but she did not cry out. She simply held him, rocking slightly, her body instinctively trying to keep him warm, even as the last of his warmth faded. Outside, The village celebrated their victory in low, exhausted voices. Inside, Amina mourned the price. Harun and Fariha came in quietly, their faces etched with grief. Fariha knelt beside Amina, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "I'm sorry, my child," she whispered, but sorry was not enough. Nothing would ever be enough. The funeral was simple. There were no grand speeches, no ornate coffins. Just the villagers, broken, humbled, grateful, gathering under the weeping sky to say goodbye to the boy who had given them their freedom. Amina stood at the edge of the freshly dug grave, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The rain fell, gently soaking into the earth, washing the dust from the air. She did not cry. Her tears had already been spent, poured into Yusuf's hands, into the blood that stained her palms, into the earth that now swallowed him whole. After the grave was filled, after the last of the villagers drifted away, Amina stayed behind. She knelt by the grave, tracing Yusuf's name into the wet earth with trembling fingers. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved all of us." The wind picked up, whispering through the trees like 1,000 unheard voices. "And I will live for you," she said. It was not a vow made in a moment of heat or desperation. It was a promise carved into her very bones. She would not waste the life Yusuf had fought and died to give her. She would carry him with her. Every step she took, she would honor him by living fiercely, fearlessly, fully. Amina rose to her feet, the rain dripping from her hair, her dress clinging to her skin. The girl who had once begged the stars for a miracle had been broken, shattered, and rebuilt into something new, something stronger, something unstoppable. As she walked back toward the village, toward the uncertain future waiting for her, she did not look back. She carried Yusuf with her, and she would carry him always. The days after the battle passed like a dream, slow, heavy, thick with a sadness that hung in the very air the villagers breathed. But mixed into that sadness was something else too, something that hadn't existed here before: freedom. The village was battered, but it was theirs now. There were no more debts hanging over Harun's head, no more whispers of fear whenever Karim's name was spoken, no more chains, not for Amina, not for anyone. In the mornings, Amina would wake early, just before the sun stretched its first fingers over the horizon. She would step outside their small house, feeling the cool dew between her toes, breathing in the clean, crisp air. And for a moment she would close her eyes and imagine Yusuf standing beside her, smiling that crooked smile that had once made her heart flutter. The villagers had changed too. They walked taller now, spoke louder, laughed more freely. They planted new seeds in the battered fields, rebuilt the fallen fences, patched the broken roofs. Each act, no matter how small, was a rebellion against the fear that had ruled them for so long. And Amina. Amina became something none of them had expected. Not just a girl, not just a survivor, but a leader. It started small. A suggestion. Here, a helping hand there. When the irrigation canals needed clearing, it was Amina who organized the workers. When a new market needed setting up to trade with nearby villages, it was Amina who led the talks. When disputes arose, it was Amina who settled them, her voice calm but firm, her gaze steady and unflinching. The people listened to her because she had earned it, not with money or threats, but with blood and courage. And though she never said it aloud, she did it all for Yusuf. Every choice she made, every step she took forward, it was his dream too. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in colors so beautiful they hurt to look at, Harun sat beside her on the small bench outside their home. He had aged so much in the last few months, his hair almost entirely gray, but there was a lightness in him now, a quiet pride that hadn't been there before. "You've changed," he said, his voice gentle. Amina smiled faintly. "We all have." Harun nodded slowly. "But you are something else. You remind me of your mother when she was young, fierce, unbreakable." Amina glanced down at her hands, rough and calloused now from work, and thought of the girl she had been, the girl who once sat under the stars, wishing for a miracle. She had found one. Or maybe she had become one. "I just want to make him proud," she said softly. Haroon's hand, rough and warm, closed over hers. "You already have." That night, Amina couldn't sleep. The memories swirled too thickly around her. Yusuf's laughter, his touch, the way he had looked at her like she was the whole world. She slipped outside and walked to the edge of the village, where the fields met the wild hills beyond. There, she found the tree they had once climbed as children, long before the world had tried to crush them. Its branches stretched wide into the night, strong and stubborn. She sat beneath it and tilted her head back, staring up at the endless sky. "Are you watching me?" she whispered. The stars blinked down at her, silent and eternal. "I miss you," she said, her voice cracking. "I miss you every day." The wind stirred gently, brushing her hair from her face. Amina closed her eyes and, for just a moment, she could almost feel him there beside her, his hand slipping into hers, his voice low and warm in her ear. "I'm proud of you, Amina." The tears came then, slow and silent, washing away some of the grief that had been lodged inside her heart for so long. She cried not because she was broken, but because she was healing, because love, even when lost, leaves something behind. Strength, hope, a future. When she finally stood and wiped her face, she felt lighter somehow, as if Yusuf had taken a piece of her sadness with him, leaving her with only the best parts of their story. Amina returned to the village as the first light of dawn painted the world gold. She had work to do, fields to sow, children to teach, lives to rebuild. And she would do it all for herself, for her people, and for the boy who had taught her that even the poorest girl in the smallest village could be stronger than kings and monsters. The story of Amina and Yusuf lived on, in every grain of wheat that grew tall under the sun, in every child who ran laughing through the fields, in every heart that beat freely without fear. It was not the ending Amina had once dreamed of, the one with white dresses and golden promises, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are even more powerful than dreams.